Philip Rogers tensed as he heard the shrill cry, "Human, what is that bulge in your swim trunks?" The young Gamelon female's voice carried across Zeno Beach, Earth's first interspecies resort, drawing all eyes to him. This was not how he'd planned to start his shift as a lifeguard. Moments earlier, Philip had been patrolling the shoreline, his gaze sweeping over the diverse crowd of humans and aliens enjoying the sun and surf. The beach was a testament to the recent peace between Earth and Gamelon, two species that had been locked in hostility for years. Now blue-skinned Gamelons with their pointed ears mingled with humans, a sight that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. His attention had been drawn to a commotion near the water. A group of Gamelon tourists huddled around something in the shallow surf, their voices raised in alarm. As Philip jogged closer, he saw the cause of their distress. A young Gamelon female was struggling against a large tentacled creature that had wrapped itself around her leg. The alien girl's eyes widened in fear as she spotted Philip approaching. He realized she was likely unused to seeing humans up close. Without hesitation, Philip plunged into the water, his muscular form cutting through the waves with practiced ease. He reached the girl and grappled with the creature, his superior human strength allowing him to pry its tentacles from her blue skin. As he stood up, water cascading down his body, Philip became aware of the Gamelon girl's intense stare. Following her gaze, he realized with a jolt that she was fixated on the pronounced bulge in his swim trunks. Unlike the Gamelon's flatter pelvic regions, human male anatomy was decidedly more prominent. The girl, Mizar, pointed and exclaimed loudly, her voice carrying across the beach. Other Gamelon tourists began to whisper and stare, their attention now focused on the human males scattered across the sand. Philip felt a flush creep up his neck as he realized the full implications of this cultural misunderstanding. Resort security arrived, their faces a mix of concern and confusion as they tried to assess the situation. Tensions began to rise between human and Gamelon guests, with both sides eyeing each other warily. Philip attempted to explain human anatomy to Mizar, but the language barrier and cultural differences only seemed to complicate matters further. Unbeknownst to the beachgoers, this incident was being closely monitored by both human and Gamelon intelligence agencies. They recognized the potential for this anatomical difference to spark diplomatic issues between the two species, potentially threatening their fragile alliance. As Philip struggled to defuse the situation, he became acutely aware of the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. What had started as a simple rescue was rapidly escalating into an interstellar incident. The future of human-Gamelon relations could hinge on his ability to navigate this delicate situation with Mizar and the other Gamelon tourists. News of the Bulge incident spread like wildfire through social media, reaching the highest levels of human and Gamelon leadership. Both sides scrambled to contain the situation, fearing that highlighting physical differences could reignite old prejudices and undo years of careful diplomacy. As the sun beat down on Zeno Beach, Philip found himself at the center of a growing storm. The resort management, under pressure from both human and Gamelon authorities, began discussing new dress code policies to prevent similar incidents. This sparked heated debates about cultural sensitivity versus human rights to self-expression. Philip took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenge ahead. He knew he had to find a way to bridge the gap between human and Gamelon cultures, starting with helping Mizar understand and accept human physical differences. The fate of interspecies relations might just depend on his next move. Philip's mind raced as he contemplated his next move. The weight of interspecies relations pressed down on his shoulders, heavier than any lifeguard's responsibility he'd faced before. Just then, his communication device buzzed with an urgent message. His presence was required at the Zeno Beach Resort's administrative offices immediately. Heart pounding, Philip made his way through the resort's winding paths, acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed him. The once relaxed atmosphere of the beach had transformed into a powder keg of tension, ready to ignite at the slightest spark. As he entered the sleek modern building that housed the resort's nerve center, Philip felt a prickle of unease. The receptionist, a usually cheerful human Gamelon hybrid, avoided his gaze as she directed him to the main conference room. The moment Philip stepped inside, he sensed the gravity of the situation. John Martinez, the resort manager, sat at the head of the table, his normally jovial face creased with worry. Beside him, a tall, blue-skinned gamelan with piercing, silver eyes regarded Philip with an unreadable expression. The name placard before him read, Zorax, Gamelan Diplomatic Liaison. "Philip, thank you for coming so quickly," John began, his voice strained. "I'm sure you're aware of the situation that's developed." Philip nodded, taking a seat across from Zorax. "Sir, I can explain—" John held up a hand, cutting him off. "I'm afraid it's escalated beyond a simple misunderstanding, Philip. Zorax, if you would." The Gamelan diplomat leaned forward, his long fingers steepled before him. "Mr. Rogers, the incident on the beach has gone viral on both human and Gamelan social media platforms. Memes and jokes about human anatomy are spreading at an alarming rate, causing significant embarrassment and confusion among both our peoples." Philip's stomach dropped. He'd known the situation was serious, but he hadn't realized the scope of its impact. "I had no idea it had spread so far," he admitted. John sighed heavily. "That's not all. We're facing pressure from multiple fronts. Conservative human groups are demanding stricter dress codes for the resort, while some Gamelan factions are calling for separate beach areas for each species." Zorax's expression tightened. "The Gamelan High Council is considering recalling our ambassador to Earth. They view this incident as a potential breach of the cultural exchange agreement we worked so hard to establish." The gravity of the situation hit Philip like a tidal wave. What had started as a simple rescue had snowballed into a full-blown diplomatic crisis. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to meet Zorax's intense gaze. "What can I do to help?" John and Zorax exchanged a look before the resort manager spoke. "We've come up with a plan, but it's going to require your full cooperation, Philip." Over the next hour, they outlined their strategy. Philip listened intently as he was tasked with giving a series of educational seminars to the Gamelan tourists, explaining human anatomy and cultural norms regarding swimwear. In return, Zorax agreed to organize similar sessions for human guests about Gamelan physiology and customs. As the meeting concluded, Philip's mind whirled with the enormity of the task before him. He was about to leave when Zorax stopped him with a gentle touch on his arm. "Mr. Rogers, there's something else you should be aware of," the Gamelan said quietly. "Protesters have begun gathering outside the resort. Both human and Gamelan groups are expressing strong opinions about the situation." Philip's heart sank. He thanked Zorax for the information and left the office, his steps heavy with the weight of responsibility. As he emerged from the building, Philip spotted a familiar blue figure standing near the beach's edge. It was Mizar, the young Gamelan female he had rescued earlier. She seemed to be alone, her posture dejected as she stared out at the waves. Driven by a mix of curiosity and concern, Philip approached her. "Mizar, are you all right?" She turned, her large violet eyes widening in recognition. "Oh, it's you, the human with the unique anatomy." Philip felt heat rise to his cheeks but pushed past his embarrassment. "I wanted to check on you after everything that happened. Are you okay?" Mizar's delicate antenna drooped slightly. "My fellow Gamelans have been less than kind since the incident. They say I showed too much interest in human physiology, but I can't help being curious. There's so much I don't understand about your species." As they walked along the shoreline, Mizar peppered Philip with questions about human biology and culture. Her genuine curiosity and eagerness to learn touched Philip, reminding him of the importance of fostering understanding between their species. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a slender human woman with short, spiky hair and keen green eyes. She introduced herself as Dr. Emily Stevens, a xenobiologist from the University of Xenological Studies. "I couldn't help but overhear your discussion," Dr. Stevens said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "I've been sent by the Earth government to study the physiological differences between humans and Gamelans. Your conversation is exactly the kind of cross-cultural exchange we need to prevent future misunderstandings." She explained her research project and requested Philip's and Mizar's participation. As they discussed the potential benefits of the study, Philip felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this crisis could lead to greater understanding between their species after all. However, their optimism was short-lived. As word of Dr. Stevens's research spread, media outlets from both Earth and Gamelon began speculating about the possibility of interspecies relationships. The already tense atmosphere at Zeno Beach grew even more charged. Philip watched with a heavy heart as the resort management implemented temporary segregated beach areas for humans and Gamelons. The decision, meant to calm tensions, only seemed to deepen the divide between the two species. As night fell on Zeno Beach, Philip retired to his quarters, his mind racing with plans for his upcoming educational seminars. He knew that the success of these presentations could be crucial in preventing a full-blown diplomatic crisis. Lying in bed, Philip stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The events of the day played on repeat in his mind. The rescue, the misunderstanding, the meeting with John and Zorax, his conversation with Mizar, and Dr. Stevens's research proposal. Each element added another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. He thought of Mizar and the genuine curiosity she had shown. Despite the cultural chasm between them, she had reached out, eager to understand. It was a small spark of hope in the gathering darkness of misunderstanding and prejudice. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Philip's last thoughts were of the challenges that lay ahead. Tomorrow, he would begin the delicate task of explaining human anatomy to a group of Gamelon tourists, all while navigating the complex web of cultural sensitivities, political pressures, and his own growing feelings for Mizar. The fate of human Gamelon relations hung in the balance, and Philip Rogers, lifeguard turned unlikely diplomat, found himself at the center of it all. The first rays of dawn crept through Philip's window, rousing him from a fitful sleep. As he dressed for the day ahead, his stomach churned with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Today marked the beginning of his educational seminar series, and he knew the stakes couldn't be higher. Philip arrived at the resort's main conference room early, setting up the anatomically correct diagrams and calibrating the holographic displays. As he worked, he couldn't help but feel exposed, knowing that these images of human physiology would soon be scrutinized by dozens of curious Gamelon eyes. The room filled quickly, a sea of blue faces regarding Philip with expressions ranging from open curiosity to thinly veiled skepticism. His gaze landed on Mizar, seated in the front row, her violet eyes wide with interest. Her presence both calmed and unnerved him. Clearing his throat, Philip began, "Good morning, and thank you for attending this seminar on human anatomy and cultural norms. I know this topic has caused some confusion, and I hope to clarify any misunderstandings." As Philip delved into the intricacies of human physiology, he struggled to maintain a professional tone. He felt his face grow hot as he explained the function of human reproductive organs, acutely aware of the Gamelon's reactions. Some leaned forward, fascinated, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mizar raised her hand, her voice clear as she asked, "Is it true that human males experience involuntary physical changes in certain situations?" Philip swallowed hard, searching for the right words. "Yes, that's correct. It's a natural biological response that—" His explanation was cut short by a commotion at the back of the room. The doors burst open, and a group of humans stormed in, led by a tall man with graying hair and fire in his eyes. "This ends now," the man shouted, his voice booming through the room. "I am Reverend Thomas Hawkins, and I will not stand by while you corrupt these innocent aliens with your perverse teachings." Chaos erupted as Hawkins and his followers charged towards the front of the room. Security guards rushed in, struggling to contain the situation. Philip watched in horror as Hawkins reached the anatomical displays, tearing down diagrams and smashing holographic projectors. In the frenzy, Philip spotted Mizar being jostled by the crowd. Time seemed to slow as he saw her lose her balance, her slender form toppling towards the hard floor. Without thinking, he leapt forward, pushing through the throng of bodies to reach her. Philip's lifeguard training kicked in as he knelt beside Mizar, gently cradling her injured arm. "Don't move," he instructed, his voice calm despite the pandemonium around them. "I need to check if anything's broken." As Philip tended to Mizar, he became aware of the Gamelon eyes upon him. The room had grown quieter, the initial shock of the intrusion giving way to a tense stillness. He could feel the weight of their gazes, watching as he carefully examined Mizar's arm, his touch gentle and professional. "It seems to be just a sprain," Philip announced, relief evident in his voice. He helped Mizar to her feet, supporting her weight as she steadied herself. "Thank you," Mizar said softly, her antenna quivering slightly. "You didn't hesitate to help me, even in all this chaos." Philip managed a small smile. "It's what I'm trained to do. Are you sure you're okay?" Before Mizar could respond, Zorax appeared at their side, his silver eyes scanning the room. "This incident will have serious repercussions," he said, his voice low. "Philip, I need to speak with you privately as soon as possible." As security finally managed to escort Reverend Hawkins and his group from the premises, Philip noticed Dr. Emily Stevens slip into the room. She caught his eye, gesturing urgently for him to join her. "Philip, I've made a breakthrough," Dr. Stevens whispered excitedly. "The genetic similarities between humans and gamelons, they're far more extensive than we initially thought. I believe interspecies reproduction might actually be possible." Philip's eyes widened at the implications. "Are you certain?" Dr. Stevens nodded, her expression a mix of excitement and apprehension. "I still need to run more tests, but the preliminary results are promising. This could change everything, Philip. The way our species interact, our entire future." Their conversation was interrupted by John Martinez, the resort manager, his face etched with worry. "Philip, I need you in my office immediately. The situation is escalating beyond our control." As Philip followed John, he caught sight of Major Sarah Connor, the resort's security chief, deep in conversation with a group of her officers. The grim set of her jaw sent a chill down his spine. In John's office, Philip found himself face-to-face with Zorax once more. The Gamelon diplomat's usual composure was noticeably strained. "I've received orders from the Gamelon High Council," Zorax began, his voice heavy. "They want Dr. Stevens' research shut down and her findings suppressed." Philip felt his heart sink. But why? This could be the key to better understanding between our species. Zorax's antennae drooped slightly. Some factions within the council fear that such knowledge could lead to complications. They believe it's better to maintain clear boundaries between our peoples. As the gravity of the situation settled over him, Philip's mind raced. He thought of Mizar's curious questions, of the young gamelons he'd seen attempting human swimming techniques, of Dr. Stevens' groundbreaking discovery. Could he stand by and watch as this chance for true understanding slipped away? A plan began to form in Philip's mind. He knew he would need allies, Mizar, Dr. Stevens, and perhaps even Zorax himself. The fate of human-gamelon relations hung in the balance, and Philip realized that his role had expanded far beyond that of a simple lifeguard. As he left John's office, his tenacity strengthened. Philip knew that the coming days would test him in ways he had never imagined. The idyllic paradise of Zeno Beach had become ground zero for a cultural and scientific revolution, and he found himself at its very center. Heart of it, Philip took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges ahead. As he walked along the beach, lost in thought, Philip spotted Mizar in the distance. Her blue form was silhouetted against the setting sun, her antennae gently swaying in the breeze. He approached her, feeling a mix of concern and something else he couldn't quite name. "Mizar," he called out softly. She turned, her violet eyes meeting his. "Philip," she responded, her voice tinged with worry. "I heard about what happened in John's office. Is it true that the Gamelon High Council wants to shut down Dr. Stevens' research?" Philip nodded grimly. "I'm afraid so, but we can't let that happen. This research could be the key to bringing our species together." Mizar's antennae perked up. "I agree, but what can we do?" A spark of inspiration hit Philip. What if we organize something to show how well our species can work together? Something fun but also challenging. "Like a sport?" Mizar suggested, her eyes lighting up. "Exactly," Philip snapped his fingers. "A mixed-species beach volleyball tournament. It's perfect. It'll showcase our physical abilities and foster teamwork." Mizar's enthusiasm was contagious. "That's brilliant, Philip. But how do we get people to participate?" "Leave that to me," Philip grinned. "I think I know just how to drum up some interest." Over the next few days, Philip and Mizar worked tirelessly to organize the tournament. They posted flyers, spoke to guests, and even managed to convince John and Zorax to endorse the event. Slowly but surely, teams began to form, each consisting of both humans and gamelons. The day of the tournament arrived, and the beach was buzzing with excitement. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze as spectators gathered around the makeshift courts. Philip stood at the center, microphone in hand, ready to kick off the event. "Welcome, everyone, to Xenobeach's first ever mixed-species volleyball tournament," he announced, his voice carrying across the sand. "Today, we celebrate what makes us unique and what brings us together. Let the games begin." The matches that followed were unlike anything Philip had ever seen. Humans leapt and spiked with impressive agility, while gamelons displayed lightning-fast reflexes and uncanny coordination. Teams quickly learned to play to each other's strengths, developing strategies that took advantage of their diverse abilities. As the tournament progressed, Philip noticed a new face in the crowd. A tall, imposing man with a military bearing was watching the games intently. Philip approached him, extending his hand. "Welcome to Xenobeach. I'm Philip Rogers, one of the organizers. And you are—" The man clasped Philip's hand firmly. "Commander Jack Harper, Earth Military. I've been sent to assess the situation here." Philip tensed slightly, but maintained his friendly demeanor. "Well, Commander, what do you think of our little tournament?" Harper's eyes scanned the beach, taking in the scenes of humans and gamelons playing together, laughing and cheering each other on. "I must admit, it's not what I expected. There's potential here, Rogers. Potential for something great." As they spoke, a commotion erupted near the resort entrance. Philip's heart sank as he recognized the voice of Reverend Hawkins, leading a group of protesters onto the beach. "This unholy mixing of species must end," Hawkins shouted, his face red with anger. "We demand separation." The crowd began to stir, tension rising as the protesters advanced. Philip saw Major Sarah Connor and her security team moving into position, ready to intervene if necessary. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air. In the chaos, a young gamelon child had become separated from her parents and was in danger of being trampled by the surging crowd. Without hesitation, Philip sprinted towards her, his lifeguard training kicking in. He weaved through the panicked masses, his eyes fixed on the terrified child. With a final burst of speed, Philip scooped her up in his arms, shielding her from the press of bodies around them. "It's okay, little one," he soothed, holding her close. "I've got you." As if on cue, the crowd parted, and Philip saw the child's relieved parents rushing towards them. He handed the girl over, his heart racing from the adrenaline. The beach had fallen silent, all eyes on Philip. He became acutely aware of the dozens of recording devices pointed in his direction, capturing the moment for posterity. Commander Harper stepped forward, his authoritative voice cutting through the tension. "This is what we should be focusing on," he declared, gesturing to Philip and the reunited gamelon family. "Not our differences, but our shared capacity for compassion and heroism." Zorax, who had been watching the events unfold, seized the moment. He strode to Harper's side, addressing the crowd. "The commander is right. We have an opportunity here to learn from each other, to grow together. That is why I am publicly declaring my support for Dr. Stevens' research to continue." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Philip caught sight of Dr. Stevens at the edge of the gathering, her eyes wide with surprise and hope. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the beach, Philip found himself standing next to Mizar once more. They watched as the crowd slowly dispersed, the day's events having shifted the atmosphere at Xenobeach. "You were amazing today," Mizar said softly, her antennae gently brushing against Philip's arm. Philip felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the setting sun. "We all were," he replied. "But this is just the beginning. There's still so much work to be done." As they stood there looking out over the ocean, Philip couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the cusp of something monumental. The future of human-gamelon relations hung in the balance, and he knew that the coming days would be crucial in determining the path forward. Behind them, the resort buzzed with activity. Dr. Stevens and her team worked tirelessly in their hidden lab, Commander Harper conferred with Major Connor about security measures, and Zorax engaged in heated discussions via hologram with the Gamelon High Council. The stage was set for the next chapter in this interstellar drama, and Philip found himself at the center of it all, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As Philip and Mizar stood on the beach watching the sun dip below the horizon, they were unaware of the storm brewing behind the scenes. The peaceful moment was shattered by the sudden appearance of John Martinez, his face etched with worry. "Philip, we have a situation," John said, his voice low and urgent. "Dr. Stevens's research findings have been leaked. It's all over the news networks." Philip's eyes widened in shock. "What? How did this happen?" John shook his head. "We're not sure, but it's causing quite a stir. Both human and Gamelon media are running wild with speculation about a common ancestral link between our species." Mizar's antenna twitched nervously. "This could change everything," she murmured. As if on cue, their attention was drawn to the sky, where a sleek Gamelon ship was descending towards the resort's landing pad. Its design was unmistakably military, its hull gleaming with an ominous sheen. "That's an Imperial-class cruiser," Mizar said, her voice tight with apprehension. "Something big is happening." The trio rushed towards the landing pad, joining a growing crowd of curious onlookers. As the ship's ramp lowered, a tall, imposing Gamelon figure emerged. His uniform was adorned with numerous medals, and his silver eyes scanned the crowd with cold calculation. "Admiral Zexalar," Mizar whispered to Philip. "He's one of the most hardline military leaders in the Gamelon High Council." Zexalar strode down the ramp, flanked by a contingent of armed Gamelon soldiers. Their presence sent a ripple of unease through the gathered humans and Gamelons alike. Commander Jack Harper pushed through the crowd, positioning himself between the Gamelon delegation and the resort guests. "Admiral Zexalar," he said, his voice firm but respectful. "Welcome to Zeno Beach Resort. I'm Commander Jack Harper, Earth Military Liaison. May I ask the purpose of your visit?" Zexalar's eyes narrowed slightly. "Commander Harper, I am here to protect Gamelon interests and ensure the containment of potentially dangerous information. The research conducted by your Dr. Stevens poses a significant threat to the established order." As the two military men engaged in a tense exchange, Philip noticed another commotion at the resort's main entrance. A group of humans in formal attire was making their way towards the landing pad, led by a distinguished-looking man with salt-and-pepper hair. John leaned in close to Philip. "That's Dr. Marcus Blackwood, the famous xenoanthropologist. Looks like Earth's government has sent their own team to verify Dr. Stevens's findings." The resort, once a haven of relaxation, was rapidly transforming into a hub of scientific and diplomatic activity. As Philip watched, resort staff began hastily converting conference rooms into makeshift laboratories and meeting spaces. Amidst the chaos, Philip felt a gentle touch on his arm. He turned to find Mizar looking at him with a mix of concern and purpose. "Philip," she said softly, "I think we need to talk to Dr. Stevens. If her research is as groundbreaking as everyone says, she might need our help." Philip nodded, his mind racing with the implications of the day's events. As they made their way towards Dr. Stevens's lab, they couldn't help but notice the changing atmosphere of the resort. Guests huddled in small groups, their conversations hushed and tinged with anxiety. The once carefree beachgoers now moved with purpose, their eyes darting suspiciously between humans and Gamelons. They found Dr. Stevens in her lab, surrounded by a whirlwind of activity. Screens displayed complex genetic models, while her team worked feverishly at various workstations. "Philip Mizar," Dr. Stevens exclaimed when she saw them. "Thank goodness you're here. Things are escalating faster than we anticipated." Before she could elaborate, a stern voice cut through the lab. "Dr. Emily Stevens?" They turned to see Admiral Zexalar standing in the doorway, flanked by his guards. "I'm afraid I must insist on reviewing all of your research materials, for security purposes, of course." Dr. Stevens straightened her lab coat, meeting Zexalar's gaze with steely tenacity. "Admiral, with all due respect, this research is the property of Earth's scientific community. I cannot simply hand it over without proper authorization." Zexalar's eyes narrowed dangerously. "I'm afraid you misunderstand, Doctor. This is not a request. The tension in the room was palpable. Philip stepped forward, placing himself between Dr. Stevens and the Admiral. Perhaps we can find a compromise, he suggested, his voice calm despite the hammering of his heart. A joint review of the findings, with representatives from both Earth and Gamelon present. Before Zexeler could respond, Dr. Blackwood appeared behind him, slightly out of breath. An excellent suggestion, he said, nodding approvingly at Philip. Admiral Zexeler, I propose we establish a neutral committee to oversee this groundbreaking research. It's in everyone's best interest to approach this collaboratively. As the two leaders began to negotiate, Philip felt a tug on his sleeve. Mizar gestured subtly towards a side door. They slipped out quietly, finding themselves in a secluded corner of the resort's garden. Philip, Mizar said urgently, I overheard some of the Gamelon soldiers talking. They're planning to seize the research by force if diplomacy fails. We need to do something. Philip's mind raced, weighing their options. We need allies, he said finally. People we can trust from both sides. And we need a plan to protect Dr. Stevens' work. As they began to formulate their strategy, a commotion from the main plaza caught their attention. A group of humans and Gamelons, their faces contorted with anger, were shouting and waving signs. Keep the species pure, one human yelled. No to genetic pollution, a Gamelon countered. Philip and Mizar exchanged a worried glance. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and they knew they were standing at a crossroads that would determine the future of human-Gamelon relations. As night fell over Zeno Beach Resort, the once peaceful vacation spot had become a powder keg of tension and conflicting interests. Philip and Mizar, their bond now thrust into the spotlight, realized that their actions in the coming hours could change the course of history for both their species. With willpower in their eyes, they set off to gather their allies and formulate a plan. The fate of Dr. Stevens' research, and perhaps the future of interspecies harmony, now rested in their hands. As Philip and Mizar set off to gather allies, the resort erupted into chaos. Shouts and angry voices filled the air, drowning out the soothing sound of waves lapping at the shore. The once peaceful vacation spot had transformed into a hotbed of tension and conflicting interests. Their first stop was John Martinez's room. They found him pacing, his face creased with worry. John, we need your help, Philip said, quickly explaining their plan to protect Dr. Stevens' research. John nodded, his expression grim. I'm in, but we'll need more than just the three of us. As they discussed potential allies, a commotion outside caught their attention. Through the window, they saw a group of humans and Gamelons congregating near the main plaza, their faces contorted with anger as they shouted and waved signs. We need to move fast, Mizar said, her antennae twitching nervously. The trio made their way through the resort, carefully avoiding the growing crowd of protesters. They managed to recruit a small but diverse team, Sarah Connor, who brought her tactical expertise, Zorax, whose political connections could prove invaluable, and a handful of trusted resort staff who knew the layout of the complex better than anyone. As they finalized their plans, an alarm blared through the resort's speakers. Attention all guests, Commander Harper's voice rang out, tension evident in his tone. Due to unforeseen circumstances, we ask that you remain in your rooms until further notice. This is for your own safety. The team exchanged worried glances. They knew time was running out. Implementing their plan, they divided into smaller groups. Philip and Mizar, along with John and a Gamelon security officer named Krell, made their way to Dr. Stevens' lab. The corridors were eerily quiet, the usual bustle of the resort replaced by an oppressive silence. As they approached the lab, they heard raised voices. Philip gestured for the others to stop, and they crept forward cautiously. I will not ask again, Dr. Stevens. Admiral Zexelar's voice carried through the door. Hand over your research immediately. And I've already told you, Admiral, Dr. Stevens replied, her voice steady despite the pressure. This research belongs to the scientific community. I won't let it be used as a political tool. Philip took a deep breath, then nodded to his companions. They burst into the lab, surprising both Zexelar and Dr. Stevens. Dr. Stevens, Philip said quickly, we need to move your research to a secure location. Now. Before Zexelar could react, Krell stepped forward, addressing the Admiral in rapid-fire Gamelon. The distraction allowed John and Mizar to begin copying Dr. Stevens' data onto secure drives. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the complex. "Security breach in Sector 7, a computerized voice announced. "All personnel report to emergency stations." Chaos erupted in the lab. Taking advantage of the confusion, Philip and his team quickly ushered Dr. Stevens out, carrying the precious data with them. As they raced through the corridors, they could hear the sounds of conflict echoing through the resort. They rounded a corner and came face to face with a group of protesters, a mix of humans and Gamelons united in their fear and anger. "Stop them!" someone shouted. "They're trying to hide the truth." Philip's mind raced, searching for a way out. Suddenly, Mizar stepped forward, her antennae glowing softly. "Please," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We're not your enemies. We're all scared and confused, but violence isn't the answer." For a moment, the crowd hesitated. Then slowly they began to part, creating a narrow path. As they made their way through, Philip caught snippets of conversation from the news feeds playing on nearby screens. His heart sank as he realized their situation had just become much more complicated. "Breaking news," an anchor announced, her face grave. "The Purity Coalition has released data suggesting that continued human-Gamelon interaction poses a severe biological threat to both species. Earth's government is considering implementing planet-wide quarantine measures." Philip's eyes met Mizar's, both realizing the gravity of the situation. They had to act fast to prevent a complete breakdown of human-Gamelon relations. As they reached the secure room where the rest of their team waited, Philip felt a strange sensation coursing through his body. He stumbled, catching himself against the wall. "Philip?" Mizar's voice was filled with concern. "Are you all right?" He looked up, ready to reassure her, but the words died in his throat. Mizar's skin was shimmering with an otherworldly glow, her antennae pulsing with energy. "What's happening to us?" Philip whispered, staring at his own hands, which seemed to radiate a subtle luminescence. Dr. Stevens rushed forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. "Fascinating," she murmured, scanning them with a handheld device. "Your physiologies are changing, adapting. It's like nothing I've ever seen before." As the implications of their transformation began to sink in, the room erupted into a flurry of activity. Dr. Stevens barked orders to her team, demanding more tests and analysis. Commander Harper argued with Earth's military command over a secure line, while Zorax engaged in heated discussions with the Gamelon High Council. Amidst the chaos, Philip and Mizar found a moment of quiet. They stood close, their altered physiologies humming in harmony. "We have to tell everyone," Mizar said softly. "This changes everything." Philip nodded, his mind racing with the potential consequences of their revelation. "It's risky, but you're right. The truth needs to come out." As they prepared to share their story with the world, the sounds of conflict grew louder outside. The Purity Coalition, emboldened by the leaked false data, was making its move. The future of human-Gamelon relations hung in the balance, and Philip knew that what happened next would shape the destiny of both their species for generations to come. Philip steadied himself against the wall, his skin shimmering with an otherworldly glow. Mizar stood beside him, her antennae pulsing with energy. The room fell silent as everyone stared at the transformed couple. Dr. Stevens broke the silence, her voice filled with awe. "This is unprecedented. Your physiologies are adapting, merging in ways we never thought possible." Before anyone could respond, the door burst open. Commander Harper rushed in, his face grim. "We need to evacuate. The Purity Coalition is storming the resort." Philip and Mizar exchanged a determined look. "No," Philip said firmly. "We need to face this head on. It's time to show everyone what's really happening." With a nod from Commander Harper, the group made their way to the resort's main plaza. As they emerged, they were met with a sea of angry faces, humans and Gamelons united in fear and mistrust. Mizar stepped forward, her luminescent form capturing everyone's attention. "Please listen to us," she called out, her voice carrying across the crowd. "What you've heard isn't the full truth. Look at us. We're living proof that humans and Gamelons can coexist, even evolve together." The crowd murmured, their anger giving way to curiosity. Philip joined Mizar, their combined glow casting a soft light over the assembled throng. "We're not a threat to either species," Philip added. "We're the beginning of something new, something beautiful." As they spoke, more human gamelan couples stepped forward from the crowd, their bodies showing similar signs of transformation. The air buzzed with a mixture of fear and excitement. Dr. Stevens seized the moment, addressing the crowd with passionate intensity. "What we're witnessing here is nothing short of miraculous. These changes aren't harmful, they're beneficial. Increased immunity, enhanced cognitive abilities, potentially even extended lifespans. We're on the cusp of a new era in interspecies relations." The news spread like wildfire. Within hours, footage of the transformed couples was broadcast across Earth and the gamelan homeworld. The revelation sent shockwaves through both societies, upending long-held beliefs about species boundaries. In the days that followed, Zeno Beach Resort became the epicenter of a scientific and cultural revolution. Dr. Stevens's team, now expanded to include both human and gamelan researchers, set up a permanent laboratory to study the physiological changes. Philip and Mizar found themselves thrust into the spotlight as unofficial ambassadors for this new era of interspecies cooperation. They spent their days meeting with scientists, politicians, and media representatives, sharing their experiences and undergoing countless tests. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of their room, overlooking the now bustling resort, Mizar turned to Philip. "Everything's changing so fast," she said softly. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Philip took her hand, feeling the gentle hum of energy between them. "As long as we're together, I'm ready for anything." Their moment of peace was interrupted by a knock at the door. Commander Harper entered, his expression serious. "We've received an invitation," he announced. "The United Nations and the Gamelan High Council want you to address a joint session. They're calling it the Interspecies Summit." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation and travel. Philip and Mizar, along with other transformed couples, embarked on a global tour, making appearances in major cities on both Earth and the gamelan homeworld. Their first stop was New York City. As they took the stage in Times Square, the crowd's reaction was a mix of awe and apprehension. Philip began to speak, his words carried on massive screens throughout the city. "We stand before you not as separate species, but as a bridge between worlds," he said, his voice strong and clear. "What's happening to us isn't a threat, it's an opportunity for growth, for understanding, for a future we can build together." As he spoke, a commotion erupted in the crowd. A figure pushed forward, brandishing a weapon. "Death to the impure!" the assailant shouted. Time seemed to slow. Philip saw the glint of the weapon, heard Mizar's sharp intake of breath. But before the attacker could act, a blur of motion intercepted them. Commander Harper, moving with lightning speed, disarmed the would-be assassin and pinned them to the ground. The crowd gasped, then erupted into cheers. The foiled attack, broadcast live across the globe, became a rallying point for supporters of human gamelan integration. In the aftermath, security measures were tightened, but Philip and Mizar refused to be cowed. They continued their tour, their message of unity and hope resonating with millions. As they traveled, reports came in of more couples experiencing physiological changes. The phenomenon was spreading, igniting both excitement and fear in equal measure. Meanwhile, back at Zeno Beach, now officially renamed the Zeno Beach Interspecies Research and Cultural Center, Dr. Stevens made a breakthrough. She burst into the conference room where the center's board was meeting, her eyes shining with excitement. "We've done it," she announced breathlessly. "We've successfully created a viable human gamelan hybrid embryo." The news sent shockwaves through the scientific community and beyond. It was the final proof that humans and gamelans were indeed compatible at the most fundamental level. As Philip and Mizar prepared to address the Interspecies Summit, they knew they stood at the threshold of a new era. The galaxy was watching, waiting to see what would emerge from this unprecedented union of two once separate species. The future was uncertain, filled with both promise and peril. But as they looked at each other, their transformed bodies glowing with shared energy, Philip and Mizar felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. Together, I'm ready for anything. As they gazed out at the bustling resort, now a hub of scientific discovery and cultural exchange, Philip's thoughts drifted to the future. He turned to Mizar, his heart racing. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you," he began, his voice soft. "With all these changes happening to us, have you considered starting a family?" Mizar's antennae quivered with excitement. "I've been thinking about it too," she admitted. "But is it even possible?" Before Philip could respond, Dr. Stevens burst into their room, her eyes alight with enthusiasm. "I couldn't wait to tell you," she exclaimed. "We've made a breakthrough at the lab. We believe it's possible for human gamelon couples to conceive naturally." The news hit Philip and Mizar like a shockwave. They listened intently as Dr. Stevens explained the intricacies of the new findings, their minds reeling with possibilities. "We've established a new xenogenetics institute within the Xeno Beach complex," Dr. Stevens continued. "If you're interested, we could begin the experimental procedure immediately." Philip and Mizar exchanged a look, years of shared experiences and unspoken understanding passing between them. They nodded in unison. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of tests, procedures, and anxious waiting. The Xenogenetics Institute became their second home, its sterile white halls a stark contrast to the vibrant resort outside. Finally, on a warm summer morning, Dr. Stevens delivered the news they had been hoping for. "Congratulations," she said, her voice barely containing her excitement. "Mizar, you're pregnant. You're carrying the first naturally conceived human gamelon hybrid." The news spread like wildfire. Within days, Xeno Beach was flooded with visitors from both Earth and the gamelon homeworld. Humans and gamelons alike flocked to the resort, drawn by the historic nature of the pregnancy. As Mizar's belly swelled, so did the resort's security concerns. Commander Harper, ever vigilant, increased patrols and implemented new safety protocols. "We can't be too careful," he warned Philip during a private briefing. "The Purity Coalition has gone underground, but our intelligence suggests they're planning something big." Philip nodded gravely, his hand instinctively moving to protect Mizar as she entered the room. She smiled at him, her glow more radiant than ever. As the due date approached, tension at the resort reached a fever pitch. Dr. Stevens and her team monitored Mizar around the clock, documenting every stage of the hybrid fetus's development. Then, on a stormy night in the late summer, chaos erupted. Alarms blared throughout the complex as security barriers were breached. The Purity Coalition had launched a coordinated attack on interspecies facilities across Earth and the gamelon homeworld, with Xeno Beach as their primary target. Commander Harper's voice crackled over the comm system. "All non-essential personnel, evacuate immediately. Security teams, report to your designated areas." Philip helped Mizar to the medical wing, his heart pounding. "Stay here," he urged her. "I need to help with the defense." Mizar grabbed his hand, her eyes wide with fear and willpower. "Be careful," she whispered. As Philip joined the security forces, he marveled at the sight before him. Humans and gamelons fought side by side, their bodies glowing with shared energy as they repelled the attackers. The battle raged for hours. Philip darted from one hotspot to another, using his enhanced abilities to outmaneuver the Purity Coalition forces. Explosions rocked the facility, and the acrid smell of smoke filled the air. Suddenly, Philip's comm crackled to life. "Philip," Dr. Stevens' voice was urgent. "Mizar's gone into labor. The medical staff is pinned down. You need to get back here now." Philip's heart leaped into his throat. He raced through the corridors, dodging debris and ducking under crossfire. As he burst into the medical wing, he found Mizar alone, her face contorted in pain. "Philip," she gasped, reaching for him. "The baby's coming." With trembling hands, Philip activated the secure channel to Dr. Stevens. Her face appeared on the screen, calm despite the chaos around her. "Listen carefully, Philip," she said. "I'm going to talk you through this." As explosions continued to rock the facility and the sounds of battle echoed through the halls, Philip found himself in the surreal position of midwife. He followed Dr. Stevens' instructions, his enhanced senses allowing him to monitor Mizar's vitals with uncanny precision. Hours passed in a blur of pain, fear, and grit. Then, just as Commander Harper's voice announced over the comm that the last of the attackers had been repelled, a new sound filled the air, the cry of a newborn. Philip looked down in awe at the child in his arms. Its skin was a soft blue, its eyes unmistakably human. It was perfect, a living bridge between two worlds. Mizar reached out, tears streaming down her face. As Philip placed the baby in her arms, a sense of peace washed over them. Despite the destruction around them, in this moment, all was right with the universe. News of the birth spread rapidly. Within hours, images of the hybrid child were broadcast across the galaxy. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The tide of opinion shifted dramatically, with the majority on both worlds embracing the new reality of human gamelan integration. As Philip and Mizar gazed at their child, marveling at the miracle they had created, they knew that this was just the beginning. The future stretched out before them, full of challenges and possibilities. But whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, as a family and as pioneers of a new era of interspecies cooperation.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.